The following program has been pre-recorded, so please don't call in at this time. If you wish to participate in the program, tune in at 5 p.m. every Wednesday for A Pause for Thought on Baton Rouge Community Radio. Good evening, fellow humans. This is Wayne Parker with A Pause for Thought here on Baton Rouge Community Radio, 96.9 FM here in Baton Rouge. Glad to have you here. I'd like to let you know that we are a live call-in show tonight. So, we always are, but you can call in at 225-343-9927, 225-343-9927 to offer your thoughts and comments on the topic of the evening. And before I talk too much about the topic, I'd like to let everyone know we have two guests in the studio tonight. Mr. Mike Mitchell, who's the district defender of the Judicial District 19. That's what is here in Baton Rouge Parish, right? East Baton Rouge Parish?
Yeah, you got it right.
I'm glad to have you here. And Jack Harrison, who is an attorney with the Public Defender's Office, juvenile defender. And you've been on the show before talking about what you guys do for people that need it.
That's right, Wayne, and it's good to be back.
Well, it's great to have you here. I mean, our topic for tonight, everyone, and as you gentlemen know, the way I billed it anyway, was Americans' general penchant to be tough on crime and throw them in jail and throw away the key, but they don't want to pay for it. Their reluctance to pay for it. And what gave me the idea to ask you guys to come in and talk about it was an article in the March 25th issue of The Economist about a case in Abbeville, Louisiana. There were a group of kids or young men, 17 of them, I think, that were known for several years to be just general hoodlums, ne'er-do-wells in the area, from what I can get from this. And the local sheriff and prosecutor brought them up on charges of various things, made a big hoopla in the media about it, calling them all these evil gangs and all that, and saying that we need to protect society from them, and put them all in jail. And it's been a year now, and only 3 of them could afford their own attorney, private attorney. The other 14 are relying on the public defender's office, and they can't afford to pay bail, so they've been in jail this whole time with nothing. And the worst part about the whole thing, from what the article says, is that they were charged with racketeering under RICO, and that seems to be the big sticking point, because these kids were dirt poor, and RICO was created to go after the rich mafiosi and all that, and these guys, they don't even think they had a central organization to where they could actually be accused of conspiring or colluding or anything. It's just a bunch of kids or young men. So I mean, what's the problem here? I mean, obviously they can't get bail, they can't post bail, and they can't get public defenders. So where are they now? What's happening with that?
Well, Wayne, we had a case here in Baton Rouge and some of it is still pending. That was very similar to the case that you just described, where law enforcement and the district attorney's office filed charges against 19 or so young men who from a neighborhood, and charged them with various crimes, but threw in the racketeering charge. And the racketeering charge ramps up everything. And they said that these kids were these bad kids that really needs to be locked up for a long time. And the public defender's office, which I head, is charged with providing attorneys for people like these kids when they can't afford to hire their own attorneys. And in this case, like the Abbeville case, there were 3 or 4 that could afford to hire their own attorneys, but the rest of them could not.
And in this case, because they were all charged with the same crimes, specifically RICO, they couldn't all have the same attorney. They had to each have an individual attorney.
They each have to have an individual attorney, and in our case, we are a staff office. So when one person on our staff represents one person, then the whole office represents that person.
Whoa.
So in this case, we couldn't assign any other attorney from our office to represent the others. The office takes one, and the others, we have to find attorneys to represent them.
By pleading and begging, basically, or I mean,
basically that's what we had been doing in the past. And the case that I'm talking about is the Big Money Block Boys is what it was called. The judge reached out to private counsel and to large law firms and asked them to come in and take on the cases. Some of them did, and they agreed to come in under one circumstance, that they would come in to protect the young man's rights, but they would not do any other work without knowing how they were going to be compensated for those cases.
Could that be one of the reasons why they often go for, they throw in a RICO charge against guys like this? I mean, does it have any effect on the income or of the state?
It has a huge effect on the income of the state. RICO, you would think that if it's a RICO case, a racketeering case, then the young men would have money to hire their own attorneys if you're going to be charged with RICO.
Right, because that's intended for rich,
the whole purpose
organized crime,
of RICO was to get organized crime enterprises, which were in it for the money. These kids, if they're RICO, they're not very lucrative because they could not afford to hire their own attorneys.
Well, but are there any federal grants that go to the prosecutor's office if they are charging people with RICO?
There are grants that go to law enforcement and that side of the fence. The prosecutor's office, the police departments, the sheriffs, the state police, everyone involved. And in some of these cases, there's a team from each one of the law enforcement agencies, sometimes including the FBI and the marshal's office, that participate in these investigations, and they all
get a cut of the money,
get some sort of grant to do it.
How about that? And that actually brings me up to one of the questions. This Abbeville case was placed with the Louisiana State Police instead of the local law enforcement officials. And I couldn't understand why they would do that, and I think you might have just answered my question.
I don't know. I wouldn't know, why they put it with the state police in that case, but that very well may be the case. Yeah,
well, it's like the drug war and asset forfeiture, like we talked about before going on the air. Unless they've changed the laws, when a police department confiscates property in a drug crime, they get to keep all the proceeds from selling it. And that's a tremendous incentive to do things that you probably shouldn't.
Yeah.
So, but here again, we're talking funding. How well? It doesn't sound like the public defender's office makes out very well with funding.
Well, that's part of the problem. If in fact law enforcement is taking on these RICO cases, and they are receiving federal grants or whatever for their efforts, the law enforcement side is always well funded. The Constitution requires that any person charged with a crime be afforded an attorney to represent them if they can't afford to. The problem is there is very little funding for that side of the case.
And so if they can't post bail and you can't provide them and nobody else can provide them with adequate representation, they just languish in jail then?
Well, I'll tell you what happened in the local case is that this case started in about 2013. These young men were in jail for roughly 2 years while the issue of how the lawyers were going to be paid was litigated in court. And eventually the judge had no choice but to reduce their bonds to a point where they could afford to get out of jail. So if they were these dangerous criminals,
They're back out.
they were back out.
Yeah. Fortunately, as far as we know, they're not. But here again, they still won't go to trial with their cases until they can get a public defender, though, right?
Right. And
So-
in some of these cases, the RICO charges were eventually dropped against them, and they are proceeding now on just regular type burglary, robbery,
Right.
attempted murder charges. Those types of charges. So those are going forward.
Okay. The article here from Abbeville talks about the Southern District, I guess, of the Public Defender's Office. I'm not sure. You might be able to say what the Southern District is, but they quote the head of that department, a G. Paul Marks.
That's the public defender's office in the 15th Judicial District.
Okay, thank you.
Lafayette Parish
Yeah.
area.
Okay, and it says in the article that as of March of this year, there were 746 individuals in that district who had been charged but don't have any representation. 746, and they say the way they word it is that's a big number, but it's much lower than the roughly 2,100 that were unrepresented at the start of 2016. So this is obviously a big problem.
It's a problem all over the state of Louisiana. We have 41 public defender's offices, and each office is terribly underfunded.
Well, how are they funded anyway? Don't they get taxpayer money?
The funds for the public defender's office generally come from court cost, usually the bulk of it from traffic tickets. So when a person is given a traffic ticket and goes to court and pays that ticket plus the court cost, $45 of that court cost goes to the local public defender's office.
And we've seen a great decline in that funding, I guess, since the flooding of last year. And I think you said because of the Alton Sterling shooting and everything else, a lot of resources were pulled away.
Well, locally here in Baton Rouge last year, my office has suffered a huge decrease in funding over the last about 10 to 11 months because last July when the Alton Sterling shooting occurred, and the demonstrations started right after that, then law enforcement pulled their traffic officers.
And there goes the public defender's source of revenue. Yeah.
And that's all it takes.
Yeah.
That's all it takes. It takes, we always used to be afraid of a slowdown by the police department if they started slowing down on their writing of tickets. Well, there was a point between the flood and the Alton Sterling demonstrations when ticket writing went down to practically zero, which meant that our revenue went down to practically zero for a couple of months.
You know, that's kind of ironic. If we have a big demonstrations like that and a lot of people get arrested, as a result, at the same time, the funding for the public defender's office goes down, so all these people who get arrested have an even less chance of getting representation if they can't afford it and don't want to go bankrupt.
Well, that's correct. Last year, between over the last 12 months, I've had to lay off staff members totaling about 16 people. We were at a point at one time where we were up to 52 attorneys. We are now down to 38 attorneys to handle a caseload of somewhere between 15,000 and 20,000 cases a year.
So that's, doing quick math, that's about 20% decline or 20% reduction in your workforce.
That's correct.
Wow. And you're handling more cases.
And,
Or there are more cases on the docket.
There are a lot of cases on the docket. Actually, to be accurate, in East Baton Rouge Parish, the arrest rate is down and the caseloads have decreased.
But not by as much as you've had to reduce the staff.
Well, that's correct. Yes.
Is there do you have any speculation as to why these arrests have declined? Are people suddenly being better, or are we finally getting all the bad guys off the street? Kidding.
I'm certain there's an explanation for it, but I'll leave that to law enforcement and district attorney's office. To
Okay.
answer.
And I think the crime rates in Baton Rouge reflect those across the country. They've been in a pretty steady decline for some years now. So.
Yeah, and I wonder if it's just been a result of people getting older. But I'm just an amateur. I don't know these things. But talking about that, okay, I want to make one more point about Louisiana. But Jack, you mentioned how the crime rate's declining all over the country. But anyway, The Economist here says that in January, in a lawsuit brought in New Orleans, a federal judge agreed that the state was, quote, failing miserably in its duty to indigent defendants. 85% of the total, but ruled that it's up to the legislature to fix the problem. And that's, I guess, what has to happen. But they also mention elsewhere in the article that it's not just Louisiana that has this problem. It's pretty much the entire country. People are real big on being tough on crime, but they don't want to pay the money to fund for the people that need it. They need that get arrested and put in. Now, for someone like me, I could probably afford to defend myself with an attorney, but it would wipe me out. But someone who already has nothing, they have nothing.
Yeah, the general sentiment, I believe, in community across the country and communities across the country is the question of why should we pay for people who've been arrested and accused of committing a crime? Well, if we believe in the presumption of innocence, and if we believe in our Constitution, and we believe that under our Constitution, the Sixth Amendment, everyone is entitled to counsel and to be presumed innocent, the only way you can protect yourself in a court of law is to have a lawyer at your side advocating for you.
And one who has the time and the staff to do research and bring in expert witnesses and the like to give you a good defense.
Yeah, that's correct.
One who has the capacity to present an effective defense, which it does cost money, certainly, but certainly locking up people and throwing away the key physically is problematic. That costs a lot of money.
Yep.
Notwithstanding the moral implications of locking people up or incarcerating people without protecting their rights on the front end. Of course, it also means we're locking up a lot of people who are innocent, shouldn't be locked up.
Yeah, there was another story on Rikers Island in The Economist talks about a guy that was accused of stealing a backpack when he was 16 years old. He couldn't afford to post bond, and due to one reason or another, his hearings were constantly delayed, and he spent 3 years in Rikers, and according to the article, there were 800 days spent in solitary confinement. But he never went to trial. And when it finally did go, the charges were thrown out. But he spent 3 years in jail, in a very brutal jail, and he didn't commit the crime.
And unfortunately, I think that is not an unusual situation in this state or across the country. We have areas where people who are arrested are not even assigned counsel, and they are expected to file their own motions, to argue their own cases, and to be advocates for themselves to getting out of jail, which is going to be extremely difficult if you are in jail.
Yeah. I was just telling Jack before you got here, Mike, I talked to a coworker today and told him what I was going to be talking about tonight. And he just told me, he says, hey, just between you and me, I've had a shady past. Now, this is a guy that's working in a really good, high-paying job with benefits now, which requires a security clearance, where we are and everything. So obviously he's overcome whatever it was that he had been involved in. But he told me, he said, I knew when I got into the system, I knew right away that if I didn't have money or didn't have people on the outside to help me that had money, I was going to be there forever.
Well, that's correct. If you don't have family on the outside that can help you, and there's only so much your family could do. Primarily, your family needs to hire a lawyer who knows how to navigate the system for you,
Yeah.
and to be an advocate for you. And if they can't afford to do that, then you can ask the judge for a public defender to be appointed to represent you. But if the public defender's caseload is so high that he can't get to you for months, then you languish in jail before anything can be done on your case.
Yeah. And there's mentioned in one of the articles, I think it was Missouri, where the public defender in one district tried to recruit or appoint the governor of the state as a public defender for a particular case just to make a point, because apparently their state legislature has to change the law too to allow decent, or proper funding for the public defender's office. And so, there in Missouri, the situation is that bad there. But one statistic that the Economist brought out was that of the 720,000 people sitting in the country's 3,000 jails awaiting trial, nearly 500,000, which is 70% of the detained, cannot afford to post bail. And if they can't post bail, obviously they can't afford an attorney, I presume. So that means that 70% of the people in jail right now awaiting trial could very well be there for years and never even be charged with it, or never even be convicted of anything.
That's correct. Parish Prison, for example, in East Baton Rouge Parish, is the place where people who are charged with crimes and are waiting trial are housed. And they can be there for a long time waiting for their trial to come up, because the system, and it's not just the public defense system, the entire system is underfunded and backed up. We need more courts, we need more judges, we need definitely more defense attorneys, and I would even venture to say that with more prosecutors we could move these cases faster.
Sure, and get some of them resolved to acquittals too, if that's what they justify. Yeah, you were going to say something else? But I wonder, what I was going to say when you're mentioning that is that if we could do away with a lot of those efforts you're talking about if we had politicians who were, then I realize I'm dreaming here, but were more principled in their behaviors and would stand up to constituents that demand people be thrown in jail for everything they don't like, by saying, look, if we want to make a new law to put people in jail, then we ought to have a requirement to boost taxes to pay for it, because it costs money to defend them, costs money to prosecute them. I think it costs like $208,000 on average a year for to keep one person incarcerated. I forget where I heard that statistic. It might have been last night, but I don't know. But it's a lot of money to keep somebody in jail, like you said. And these people that don't want to pay for the public defenders, you're going to pay one way or another.
Well, if you don't have public defenders in place to represent people, then their cases can't move. And the longer they stay in jail, the more the public pays. And until we get to a point where we can expedite their cases, the more money that is going to cost the public.
Yeah, and it would be more cost effective probably to pay more money to properly fund the public defender's office than it is now to just leave them there languishing and pay for their incarceration.
We luckily we seem to have a governor who seems to understand that reinvestment in the criminal justice system actually saves money, not costs money. Otherwise, the costs just go up year after year after year.
Yeah, and for one of the reasons is the guys that are trapped in the system are going to be brutalized by their fellow inmates, the jailers, and come out, if they come out, worse criminals than they were before. And, the system does no good. Didn't you mention something before we went on the air about some of the ideas being proposed to the legislature now, going after ways to reduce the prosecutions, I guess, or find other ways to deal with certain crimes, and also ways to help convicts who get out find work and become productive?
It's the theory is primarily that if you find ways to cut the amount of time that a person has to spend in jail, but at the same time provide him with the services that he needs to become a productive citizen, then you actually save money in the long run. And that's what the adjustment reinvestment legislation, as I understand it, is all about.
Okay. Yeah. Jack?
It's it does have to be a far-sighted fiscal approach. And today and over the past few weeks in the state capitol, there has been some rather positive discussion about some of the reinvestment approaches. Singer John Legend was testifying today in one of the House committees, and he got some very good. It was a very thoughtful and provocative discussion, and he got some very good response and some very thoughtful remarks by representatives from different parts of the state. So hopefully the state now is in a position where this move away from just mass incarceration can have some momentum to both save the state money and to create a place for where people can have a better life.
Yeah. Yeah. I have one statistic here. The United States, which has the highest incarceration rate in the world, imprisons 40 persons for every 100,000, and Louisiana has 90 incarcerated for every 100,000. And yet, we don't see that. We see crime declining, but it's probably for demographics reasons or something else. It's not because all these people are in jail. But we're the worst, costing ourselves the most money, and we're spending the least, and funding the public defender's office the poorest. How about the way that judges, sheriffs, and district attorneys here in Louisiana are elected? Do you think that might have a hand in this attitude of, be tough on crime and all that?
I think that, that's, legislators are the ones who make the laws, who make laws regarding the criminal statutes and such. And I think more so than with the sheriffs and district attorneys, it's just the political beast. It's always easier to get votes espousing a position that you're tough on crime than the opposite. No one's ever elected by saying, you know what, I'm going to have some serious and nuanced thought about how we can lessen the number of people incarcerated in our state.
Yeah, people will get bored with that real quickly. And I'm thinking of Clay Higgins now over in, I think it's Iberia Parish. He made a name for himself getting on TV with his camos on and his bulletproof vest and his M16 or whatever, and surrounded with a whole bunch of other armed officers behind him, taunting criminals, taunting them, saying, we're coming after you, that sort of thing. And that plays well in politics.
I'm not sure anyone's ever lost an election by saying, I'm going to be tough on crime.
Yeah. Yeah, that plays into it too, and that forms the public opinion that ends up supporting laws and the like. But I'm looking here. Is there anything else you guys wanted to talk about as far as what you'd like to see happen? I think you're like 20% underfunded, or 20% short of the attorneys that you have in the state, really, huh?
We're 20% in locally.
In locally, yeah.
We are 20% short in the number of attorneys that we had. And let me say that if you look at the number of attorneys that we had compared to our caseloads, we were woefully understaffed.
To begin with.
Yeah. And woefully underfunded to begin with. So any loss just exacerbates our problem and our inability to adequately represent everyone that we're appointed to represent in a timely fashion.
Right. So to where you're not already punished for 3 years before you even go to trial.
Correct. And we have some in the East Baton Rouge Parish Public Defender's Office. We have some of the best criminal defense attorneys in this area, certainly, and if not in the state, and we have some of the hardest working criminal defense attorneys.
Well, like Jack and I were talking about before the show, I'm not sure if you were here yet or not, but people that get into the public defender's office as a career are not in it for the money. They're in it because they're passionate about what they're doing and they care about helping these people.
Exactly. I can agree that you cannot stay in this business for the money. And a good example of that is the young man that we have in here with us today, Jack Harrison.
Who has had a chance to speak all too little, but...
And that's okay. I am enjoying the conversation. It's an invigorating job. It's rewarding in so many ways other than monetary, which, that's I know what that picture looks like when I knew what it looked like when I signed up. But it does have to be a labor of love because it's not one of fiscal responsibility on my part.
Yeah. Well, yeah, but I know I haven't been able to spend my whole life, fighting for my passions or whatever, fighting for justice. But I can see where if you have the chance to do it, it's going to be far more rewarding than just a paycheck. And I'm thankful you guys are here, and hopefully we can get some things done in this legislative session and maybe more so later. But we need to change people's minds too and quit throwing people in jail just because we don't like them. But we got to go. We've been listening to Wayne Parker with a pause for thought with Jack Harrison with the Public Defender's Office, Juvenile Defense, and Mr. Mike Mitchell, who is the District Public Defender for East Baton Rouge Parish. I thank you, gentlemen, for being here. And you guys all have a good night. Thank you.
All right,
Thank you, Wayne.